I am pleased to rise today to speak in favor of jobs, in favor of the environment, in favor of the prosperity and dignity of our Indigenous people, and to speak against the wrong-headed decision of this Liberal government to ban the shipment of clean, green Canadian energy off of the northwest coast of British Columbia. Before I begin addressing the specifics of that export, I would like to address some of the falsehoods that have been espoused by numerous members of the House, including the preceding speaker, falsehoods that have been used to destroy the jobs, the livelihoods of thousands of Canadians, including our Indigenous people, over the last 5 years. So let me start with the first falsehood that has been used to justify this attack on our clean, green, Western Canadian energy sector. The first is that the reason that our energy sector is suffering is because the world is just moving away from oil. That's just the way the world is going, we're told. Well, that is factually wrong. In fact, this week, the IMF reported that oil prices will rise 20% this year over last. And the International Energy Agency projects that oil consumption will average 100 million barrels per day every day for the next 20 years. That is not a reduction. In fact, the agency predicts that even if all of the most draconian anti-energy, anti-carbon policies were put in place by all of the governments of the world, that for the next 2 decades, the globe will still consume at least 60 million barrels of oil per day. That's why the U.S. oil sector has doubled its production in the last 13 years, while our sector has been in full-scale collapse. So the question is not if the world will use oil. The question is how, and more importantly, whose oil. The member for Regina Louvain brought to the world's attention an interesting point recently. He said of the trendy anti-development hipsters who are constantly telling us that they buy fair trade coffee, that these same people are not concerned in the least with whether or not they are consuming fair trade oil. They see no problem with Canada importing millions of barrels of oil from countries that engage in monstrous human rights violations in order to produce that oil. And at the same time, they denigrate the production of ethical, green, clean Canadian petroleum. And that brings us to the next falsehood that opponents of this bill and of the energy sector in Canada have espoused, and that is that their policies are attempting to help the environment. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. Let me first of all address the tanker ban that this bill proposes to remove. There are some exceptions in the bill, to the tanker ban in Canada, exceptions that the Liberal government put in with support by the NDP and Greens. And those exceptions include that, in fact, through northern British Columbia waters, petroleum products can be shipped. Liquefied natural gas, gasoline, and jet fuel can pass through those waters. Of course, all of those fuels are foreign-produced fuels, so the ban only applies to ethically produced Canadian oil being shipped out of Canada, but not to unethical and environmentally degrading foreign oil being shipped off of the coast. So obviously, the ban has nothing to do with protecting the coast from shipping. It allows shipping. It just doesn't allow the shipping of Canadian products. So when the Liberals brought in the bill, they only banned Canadian energy from being shipped off the northwestern coast, not the pass-through of foreign energy in our water. So obviously, it has nothing to do with protecting the water or protecting against spills. It has everything to do with shutting in Canadian energy production. Finally, on this point about the environment. We have the most environmentally friendly oil sector in the world. In fact, if you were to displace a world barrel of oil with an Alberta or Saskatchewan barrel of oil, you reduce global emissions because our emissions per barrel are lower than the global average. In fact, some Canadian oil companies are not only proposing to go carbon neutral, but Whitecap, a Calgary-based oil company, is the world's first carbon negative company. It is capable of taking, in fact, it presently does take more carbon out of the atmosphere than it puts into it. So it has found a way to do this by storing carbon beneath the earth, from whence it originally came. Perhaps one of the most promising emission reductions technologies on earth. In fact, Elon Musk announced just in the last 2 weeks that he would pay $100 million to the best carbon capture and storage initiative that a company can invent. I hope that Mr. Musk, who I'm sure is listening to this speech, takes a careful look at Whitecap Resources and gives $100 million to that company to create more jobs taking carbon out of the atmosphere. Now, the next falsehood and the lie that opponents of Canadian energy spread, and that is that they're doing this for Indigenous people. That is a total and absolute falsehood. In fact, when the Liberal government under this Prime Minister canceled the Northern Gateway pipeline, which would have shipped Western oil to the Pacific and onward to Asia, a statement came out from 31 First Nations and Métis communities who said, and I quote, "We are profoundly shocked and disappointed by the news that the federal government has no intention of pursuing any further consultation and dialogue with our communities on the important issue of the Northern Gateway project. We are also deeply disappointed that a Prime Minister who campaigned on a promise of reconciliation with Indigenous communities would now blatantly choose to deny our 31 First Nations and Métis communities of our constitutionally protected right to economic development. We see today's announcement as clear evidence of their unwillingness to follow through on this promise. The economic benefits from Northern Gateway, the pipeline, to Indigenous communities are unprecedented in Canadian history. As part of the opportunity to share up to 33% ownership and control in a major Canadian energy infrastructure project. The project's Aboriginal equity partners would also receive $2 billion in long-term economic, business, and education opportunities for their communities. Now, all of the left-wing parties, the Greens, the NDP, and the Liberals, who claim that they believe in reconciliation, had no problem vaporizing that $2 billion worth of educational, economic, and business opportunities for those communities. They had no problem bulldozing over the constitutional rights of Indigenous communities to be consulted before energy and resource decisions are made with respect to their lands, because these parties actually don't care about reconciliation. They care only about using First Nations communities as an excuse, a false and dishonest excuse to block energy sector development and play to a far-left ideology that does nothing for this country. So it is another falsehood to claim that any of this is being done for the Indigenous people. Next, there's a claim that this sector only matters to Western Canada. Again, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, Canada's #1 export is oil. #1, far greater than auto parts, which is a distant second, and far greater than any other export. And since the attack on our energy sector that began in 2015, Canada has had a trade deficit in every single year. That means we are buying more from the world and we are borrowing from the world to pay for it. That is a recipe to indebt ourselves and to enslave ourselves to foreign lenders who lend to us so that we can buy from them. They get the money, we get the debt, and forever after we work to pay their bills through the interest payments. That is not a future. Our future should be one of energy independence, of reaching foreign markets and getting world prices and getting big, powerful paychecks for Canadian workers, especially Indigenous workers, to defeat poverty through powerful new job opportunities for pipe fitters, welders, engineers, and others. This is the way that we secure jobs, secure our economy, and secure our future. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.